15 hours, brilliant.
Okay. See you on the other side.
Okay.
You're going
Gemma?
live now. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Hi, well, good evening to everyone, all of our guests this evening. Really delighted to have launched this evening's presentation. And delighted to welcome all of our visitors from all around the country. I think we've put up initially 100 tickets on Eventbrite, and I've just published 100 more because it's sold out. We're not making any financial gain from this, just to reassure everyone, but it's fantastic that we've got such a massive audience with us here this evening. To introduce myself, I'm Mike Dring. I'm a senior lecturer at the School of Architecture and Design here in Birmingham. And as part of our annual MArch Symposium, we've invited our speakers this evening, Glenn Howells and Kevin Singh, to talk to us about the English National Ballet project. Just a little bit about what we've been doing today. The symposium has marked the restart of the academic year after the Christmas break. And it's been really interesting day of sharing ideas across our students. And we've also had first year students and final year students from our BA course with us. And it's really part of the course that we encourage collaboration and dialogue amongst our students in developing depth of the depth of thinking and the confidence in our students' work. So this evening, as I said, we're delighted to welcome our two guest speakers this evening, who are going to be talking about the English National Ballet, described by their client Tamara Rojo as the Bauhaus for dance, giving the lecture its title this evening. And it's a multiple award-winning building, as I think we'll hear more about this evening. To introduce our speakers very briefly, I'm sure they'll want to give a bit more of their own introduction. Glenn is a visiting professor here at the School of Architecture and is a practitioner who's grown his practice here in Birmingham since 1990, also with an office in London, and is renowned for the clarity of the vision of the work and the purpose in delivering multiple award-winning buildings. Kevin is very well known to us here at the School of Architecture, having been our head of school until summer 2020, and is now head of the Manchester School of Architecture. And his practice of Space Studios collaborated with Glenn Howells Architects on the design and delivery of the ballet that we're going to hear about this evening. So we've asked them to speak about their collaboration on the ballet. We're going to have a talk, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes or something like that. I think there's 500 slides I heard earlier, but we'll see how we get on. But we have a Q&A box, which you can ask your questions in. So please do post questions during the presentation, and then we'll have some time at the end for wrapping up with a full Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Glenn and Kevin. So welcome.
Thanks, Mike, and delighted to be here. It feels like this is the event that I haven't been out for getting on for six months, so this is I'm delighted to have somebody apart from my family to listen to me. So and Kevin, thank you for inviting me. So I'm Glenn Howells from Glenn Howells Architects. Kevin? He's muted, which is a rare experience.
Thanks for that, Glenn. Yeah, delighted to be back, everybody. Nice to see everybody. Kevin Singh from the Space Studio. I've got that hat on today.
Okay, so what we're going to do is just go through some pictures which start to tell a story, and then
it needs to move back to you, Glenn. I think I'm still live.
Okay, can you hear me?
That's it.
Okay. Right, so what we're going to do is just start to tell a story with the help of some pictures, and then we'll sort of then start to talk about how both of our organisations brought this thing into being. I mean, the first thing is, hang on. The first thing is really just to talk about the organisation that we supported. I mean, this isn't, whilst Space Studio and GHA worked on this project, it was really the ambition of English National Ballet that drove it forward, and it was a remarkable organisation that we got invited to start to work with. I mean, I'm not going to read out everything on that slide, but what you realise is that it's got an amazing heritage going back 70 years. the thing about English National Ballet is it's a touring organisation. So whilst it's got its base in the UK, under normal circumstances, it tours. And so in addition to that, it's the UK leader in creative learning and engagement. So it's also got a school as part of it. And the more we worked with ENB, the more we realised how what a phenomenal organisation and their ambition was. Talking about phenomenal, Tamara Rocker, who's the artistic director of the English National Ballet, was at the forefront of leading this project. And actually, to a large extent, it was her vision to really transform English National Ballet and use the new headquarters as the vehicle to transform the organisation. So it had been in its present home for about 50 or 60 years, and then at that point she took over and she realised that English National Ballet needed to transform itself. So then it moved. First, when we discovered it, it was in Markover House, which was in Kensington. And this was really, I mean, it was great for the organisation in getting it going. But by the time we went there and saw how they were working, you'd got ballet dancers in really cramped, converted facilities where none of the spaces, because they're a touring company, were big enough to recreate and they couldn't really rehearse spaces in anything like the auditorium and the stage areas that they were used to working in. In addition to that, the school was separated, all their making facilities were in different headquarters, all their storage was elsewhere. So as they'd grown disparately across a number of different sites in London. And it was Tamara's vision to bring them into a new place, which would then project them for the next 50 to 100 years. So this was what the ENB started to do. What they set out to do in 2014 was they began their search for how they could take the next step as an organisation. And they developed a brief, which I'll come on to shortly, but it was not necessarily the brief, it was the idea, a concept that it was a building that allowed them to fulfil their creative ambitions, but also made them a more sustainable organisation, that it would be big enough that they could rent it out and hire out some of the performance spaces. So when they're on tour, it became an income stream. The other vision was that they wanted to connect with the community. Already at Markover House, they developed an extensive community program and with outreach programs, which they saw they wanted to develop and take further. But a really important additional step for ENB was to co-locate the dance school with the school. I mean, that's quite a rare thing to do. And when we were starting to talk to ENB, they found that the connection and the relationship between the two separate parts, between the professional dancers and students coming through the school, was totally missed or largely missed by having different locations. And then what was spoken about a lot before we got into the detailed brief by Tamara and her team was the idea that they create a family, that English National Ballet, to operate to its full extent and to maximise its potential, needed to be in a living space where they could share experiences and just have social space. So it's not just about the production spaces and the technical spaces. It was, and Kevin will talk about this shortly, is how you get the most out of the circulation and the informal spaces. So our involvement came along as part of that journey because English National Ballet were looking at a number of different sites in London, across from West London all the way to East London. And we were working on this project, which was a curious thing called London City Island. As you can see, it's not truly an island because it's connected on its southern tip to land, and there's a road connection. But it's a curious little island in the River Lee, which comes down from the Olympic site and down to the Thames, right next to the Dome. And whilst we were building this mixed-use development, English National Ballet had a look at it, and for a number of reasons, they decided to build their home on this location here. One was that it was a completely different location. It was in East London, and so their ability to get some land and to do a building of scale, which was unaffordable in the West End of London, was possible in the East. It had benefited from amazing connections. On that slide there, you can see to the south, a bridge which connects it, a new bridge which connects it to Canning Town. That's DLR and the tube system. But also, it allowed them to be at the centre of a new development. And so they're not inheriting, they weren't having to sort of accommodate, and they could shape their environment. And I think an important part of this was the partnership with Eco World Ballymore, who were the master developers for the site. It was this really curious partnership where, as part of the deal, they got helped financially in terms of the base build in the site to then provide the base build for English National Ballet, who then came in, appointed their own design team, and then developed the project. And it was as part of that process that both ourselves and Space Studio, through a competitive process, were appointed by English National Ballet. And so that's an aerial picture of the building that you can't really see English National Ballet, because English National Ballet building is, you've got these multicoloured sort of buildings on the outside, which have got active uses at ground floors and apartments and homes above. But what you've got in the middle of that is a soft centre, which is the English National Ballet headquarters. And there's a picture of it, gives a better glimpse of it there. But the idea was that from the outset was this curious little island, always from the planning consent onwards, had got some cultural use. It was supposed to be the headquarters for arts and business, but in the end, the site became available and English National Ballet took full advantage of it. So I'm not going to read out everything on that list, there's quite a lot there, but what we were absolutely staggered by when we started to work with English National Ballet was how much they tried to squeeze into it. So it was 7 15-metre by 15-metre state-of-the-art dance studios. So each one is the full size of the London Coliseum stage area. And one of those, they wanted to be so large that it also had an auditorium attached to it. I'm not going to read out everything on there, but it had lots of support staff, lots of training space. It had a school attached to it. And so in the end, it became a building of getting on for 10,000 square meters on a site 2,000 square meters. So it really was a Rubik cube of how within quite a confined site we could get all that to fit. And so this is the Rubik cube. This starts to then show the principles of how we started to organize it. And there's some, also what I failed to mention was all this was on not a huge budget. So English National Ballet came to us and said, we've got this much money to spend. We've got the building, the base building also was on a tight budget. And so what we had to do was work with English National Ballet to come up with a diagram where we stacked very economically all the major dance spaces. So what you have is the larger spaces, the 7 main dance studios, all stack over each other because they're about 7 meters in height. They're double height spaces. And then elsewhere, we were then filling in those with the support spaces. I remember on the design process, very early on, we were working with Tamara, and we said we could only get in, I think it was 6 full dance studios plus the large one. And she said, no, we need to get all of the dance studios in. We need to get absolutely the full number of dance studios in. And I said, well, look, we've done our best. I really looked at how we can get all these in. And this was Tamara. This is how determined she is. She got our drawings and cut out pieces of paper and then worked and sent us back her version if we moved things around. So I must admit, we can only take some of the responsibility. So this is a 3-way design process. It was Space Studio, GHA, but very, very clearly Tamara was involved as well. And then we developed the project through a series of models, just to explain it to ourselves and also to explain it to English National Ballet. And one thing they're absolutely fascinated by was not just about how we accommodated and got the Rubik cube to work by getting the number of dance studios in, what was the quality of the light and what was the quality of the circulation and the journey through the building. So the next bit of the journey was once we developed the Rubik cube and managed to arrange all of the volumes in a really efficient and way, the job then was, what's the architecture? How does the building? And actually, the language of the architecture came from delivering the spaces as in the leanest way possible. As I say, our budget was about half that, and a quarter of that spent on some arts projects in the capital. And what we had to do was get every pound to go a long, long way. So, as like on many of our projects, we actually really enjoy the process of working when there's restricted resources. And on this one of the things we started to think about was, okay, we haven't got lots of extra money to start to decorate a building and apply lots of layers. So everything that was essential, including the structure, had to work really hard. And so what we then started to do was let the building, working closely with the full team, engineers, acousticians, start to tell us what the building wanted to be. And one of the fundamental building blocks of this building is concrete. And the reason we couldn't use steel, and it was largely a concrete building, was not only fire and thermal mass, but also it was the dance. When you've got up to 50 dancers in one space, all jumping up and down at the same time on a space which is 15 meters by 15 meters, and it's over another dance studio which needs to be acoustically separate, you need incredibly stiff floors. And so that's why we went for these are motorway structures. So we borrowed a technology which is used for highways and bridges, and we brought it into an arts building. And it was Dan Mulligan, who was our director partner now, that was leading on this. And he stumbled across this structure, and it was an amazing sort of tool, really. It gave us all the stiffness, very low cost, but also, as you can see, by integrating the mechanical and electrical services, we ended up with a really integrated servicing state. So there's no exposed duct work. Everything is managed within this. And then on top of this concrete structure, we had the very specialized English National Ballet bespoke dance floor that we can't tell anybody because it's a trade secret how it works. Concrete's got bad reputation in terms of being bad for carbon. I mean, but when we looked at this and we thought, I think by using GGBS, which is blast furnace slag, as one of the aggregates, we drastically reduced. So as much as we could do, we decarbonized even the concrete elements of it. And these are some of those bridge structures which form the dance studios being lifted in, and what the building was like in its raw state. But as you can see, what we wanted to do, and this is Tamara's vision for the building, was not to do a posh building. She wanted this building to be raw, that when people were in it and dancers were in it, they could sense that the building was lean and working really hard. They wanted this not to be a trophy arts project for the capital. They wanted it to be a working, gutsy factory for dance. The other material which was absolutely pivotal to it, there's only really two materials in the job, is the glass facade. So pretty much all of the facades on this building are glazed because the ambition was to have brilliant quality of natural light inside these dance studios. And the corollary of that was at night time, that when the lights were on and it became a lantern and you could sense movement and life within the buildings. But we had privacy and we had solar gain issues to manage as well in having a largely glazed building. So we used a brilliant material called linnet, which is this reeded planked glass solution, which also we can incorporate natural translucent insulation into. So by sandwiching two of these sort of pieces of glass together and filling it with daylight insulation, which is a foam, we can also get diffused light in and get a lovely glowing building at night time. So as the words say on the slide there, so what it did is it created brilliant quality of daylight in the daytime, but also allowed the building to become a beacon, a lighthouse at night time. And this is some of the sort of sections of how we achieved that. So you can see those two, really the building, one of my favorite buildings is the Maison de Verre in Paris. Which again was very lean. It brought together just, so it was a glass building with a steel structure in that case. On this one, it was a very precisely crafted building. And also both of these building products we didn't make, so they're off the shelf. So all the maths was then coordinated between coordinating the linnet panels and the double T structures. All the maths was given to us to coordinate. And a huge amount of work went into then organizing that. And I've mentioned sustainability in terms of its carbon sustainability, which then went through to the environmental controls and using the thermal mass of the building. But as I say, going back to the other dimension on its sustainability, economic sustainability was one of the things that the job had to deliver. So having accessibility so the building could be used, renting out, it was a Porsche evening. It's been also rented out to Cameron Macintosh. So the building continues to did continue until lockdown to bring in a healthy revenue for the organisation, whilst the building's out of hours or the organisation's on tour. Kevin, over to you.
Right, thanks, Glenn. I think actually really interesting there, kind of taking my mind back now to some of those early stages and things that I actually kind of forgotten. So I'll try and pick some of those up as I'm speaking about it. Next slide, please. Next slide. I don't know who's moving the slides. Oh, okay. So I think just to clarify our appointment, we did win it in a competitive interview. I think we joined the project around Reba stage 2. So the design was, this concept design was, fully in place really. We had a competitive interview. I remember getting a call when I was actually coincidentally down in London and someone saying, do you want to do this sort of training headquarters? We can't really tell you what it is. So we came for it, and then they obviously told us it was a ballet and did an interview. And my colleague at the time, Joe Caldicott, put together a Prezzo presentation that was sort of spinning around and had a kind of dynamic quality, which I think sort of set the tone for some of the things we tried to do. The probably the biggest challenge for us and for me personally was to understand the world of ballet. It's not something that I'd ever been to. I didn't really know anything about it. And we spent a lot of time with the client, lots of consultation meetings. And Glenn was talking about the challenges with Mark over House. I remember the meeting room was one of the studios. It kind of doubled up. They had to move all the tables to one side. I remember there was just one men's toilet on the 4th floor. So when you were there for a day, you had to make a trek to the 4th floor. And we were appointed one of the dancers from the company, Amber Hunt, was our liaison, and told us a lot about the kind of sort of world of ballet really. So things like the sort of law of the jungle almost. I remember when we were looking at the design of the studios, we said, well, do we need to, mark a place for each person where they put their kind of, where they put all their bits and pieces. And she said, no, what happens, and the same with the dressing rooms, they all go in and then they just know the seniority. And then the first one goes and takes their place, and then the next one takes their place, and so on. And then she told us about things like they get so exhausted that they just want to sleep everywhere. She said, if you put a nice piece of furniture in, someone will just sleep on it. Things like shellac that they for sort of hardening the base of the shoes, and they would put shellac on the shoes and just put them on a radiator. So it was all these kind of things that you just you just kind of wouldn't know unless you sort of got the insights into the world of ballet. And something else that was very interesting is they have a community program called Dance for Parkinson's. And so when we were thinking about the furniture, we had to think very carefully about kind of furniture that was suitable for those kind of users. We obviously had to develop a position and work in harmony with Glenn, and Glenn and I have known each other a long time, and I think architecturally we share very similar sort of beliefs really, but we were appointed separately, and luckily we're able to come together with a kind of shared vision. And then so it's already talked about working with a client, but selecting and procuring the furniture was a challenge as well. So next slide. So early thoughts, we were thinking about the sort of movement in ballet, sort of strength and tension, movement, freedom, geometry, expression. And I'm always, next slide, always inspired by the Enrique Morales archery range in Barcelona, the Barcelona Olympics. And just that sense of how you get a sort of strength and tension coming through in the architecture. Also thinking then about the movement of the dancers. So in a way, when you think about an art gallery, the art often brings it to life. And Glenn has talked about this building that works really hard, but effectively is kind of container for the activity. So we're very interested in somehow trying to get across that sense of the dynamic movement in the space. And then starting to think about what else was out there. So this is obviously the Gary building, the sort of Fred and Ginger it's called. It's supposed to be Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, these two bits of a building that kind of dance together. And then Preston, it's interesting designing a home for ballet. It's not like a housing scheme or a university building where there's a million precedents. So Joe and I went down to see Rombert, and Tamara came with us, and that was a kind of really interesting experience in itself. But you know, this was a very kind of sort of very stylized, sort of, you know, minimal type interior. Then also went closer to home, the Birmingham Royal Ballet, Austin Smith Lord, and actually a slide I didn't put in, but Jo happened to be in Texas, and she went over to the ballet in Houston, which I think was probably, until the ENB, was probably the most renowned ballet facility in the world. And then, of course, the really famous one, the bridge at the Royal Ballet School at Covent Garden by Wilkinson Eyre. And then a quote from Tamara: "I want the space to echo the sound of creative Britain." So I think, next slide, the first thing that we did was we took, you know, we got the plans from GHA, and, you know, really appreciated they've been through an incredible briefing process. So just really tried to look at some fairly minimal interventions that might allow us to bring some of these ideas to the fore. So you can see on the last slide, actually, the reception desk, we thought about, could it be sort of, you know, more dynamic? Could it be curved? Started to think about some of the detail of the changing rooms, for example. Next slide. And just going through the spaces, very small tweaks, just to see how we could try and bring a little bit of extra value to the project. And the green room there, actually, which is that space in the middle that's got lots of red pen, and I'll talk about that in more detail later, but that was interesting for us because there wasn't really a brief at that point. And you know, and you can see that it's actually very similar similar size to all of the dance studio, so you know, a large space to deal with there. Yeah, just smaller tweaks and so on. So moving on to inspirations, the Aqua Tower, Studio Gang in Chicago, with this kind of dynamic quality. Shumi's canopy at Parc de la Villette that sort of flutters along and gives that almost like a ribbon, really. And then the Casa de Musica, and because we'd seen the early concept drawings of the images of the foyer with the concrete, and so we got quite interested in this idea of embossing into the concrete, perhaps some of the graphics and so on. And then sculptural reception desk. So this is just off the shelf, but obviously the ability to do a bespoke one. And then furniture that perhaps wasn't kind of directional. You know, it sort of almost sat as objects in the space and gave a sense of movement. So I'm just going to talk about three spaces really, and they had different sort of levels of resolution when we started the project, and different levels of detail. So this was the initial lobby design. So you can see the concrete there that I'm talking about, and the first design for the staircase and the reception desk. And you know, we started to wonder really whether we could get some more movement in the staircase. So I'm sure many people have been to the pyramid at the Louvre. This is the IMP. And then thinking perhaps about a horizontal emphasis, and of course the obvious connection to the ballet bar there with the two bars. And other ways to perhaps express movement. So this is Museum of Scotland, where having the kind of apertures can give a sort of dynamic quality. So that's, again, just a reminder, that's where we started with the initial design, and then went through a whole series of sort of iterations really with the staircase. So first of all, just go back one, just marking up, you know, perhaps how it could have that almost double balustrade or double handrail, and making it more sculptural, thinking about the desk, for example. And GHA modelled all of these up. So this was a sort of timber, and you can see the ballet bars really that sort of go into the distance, and the desk being more sculptural, and also the embossed concrete actually, going back to the Casa de Musica. This was yeah, just on the lift shaft. This was an idea of maybe something lighter that could be lit up at night, so much more in line with the concept of the overall building. Next slide. And I think this is what kind of unlocked the idea really. This is the idea of this ribbon that almost sort of winds its way up through the space. And so we got to this fantastic staircase design that, next slide. Oh, sorry, this was a kind of winding one that came up and round. And then the next one, yeah, and this is what we really hoped to achieve. I think we got it costed, and I think it was about £1 million in itself. So we had to rethink that. But you can see the principle here, and then it sort of shoots out at the end. And then I think at this point you can see that the logo is embossed actually into the plasterwork there. And this was actually my highlight of working on the project with Glenn and Dan and Rob and the team at GHA, was when we started to get to this idea of this staircase that moved up through the space, and we moved from doing some sketches straight into the studio. Somebody started to model it, and it was it was an incredible experience actually, just to sort of spend so much time focusing on one element. We'll come back to this later. This is the finished article. So the second space I wanted to talk about was the green room. So as I said earlier, it was just it was effectively empty. So one of my favourite places in the world is the no longer there, but the Brasserie by Dilla Scofidio Renfro at the Seagram building in New York, and really like these booths and the kind of dynamic quality, the way they sort of dance through the space, but also the sort of intimacy of the canopy that wraps around. Also, we had this idea about what we started to call the pit, a sort of sunken area, and this was going back to Amber from the dance company, saying that people wanted to stretch out, they wanted to sleep everywhere. So we thought, well, if we have a pit that people can just kind of lounge around in and stretch and so on, that could be really that could be quite fun. And so these were some of my early very rough sketches, as you can see. But on the left hand side there, you can see the booths on the left hand side numbered 1 to 4. You can see the sort of kitchen island, that kind of bullet shape, and then behind that are those sort of 2 U shapes. They were two pits which were people to stretch in, and above that were an idea we came up with some sleeping pods. And this was the idea that the dancers were so exhausted. These didn't make it through the final stages because I think the ballet were very concerned what people might actually do in the sleeping pods. But it was an idea that went for some time, and these are just some versions. That was a very simple SketchUp model of this space. And what was very interesting about the green room is that the rooms from above look down into it. And again, you can see just a version there of the the iteration. Here's the booths that we designed that kind of dance through the space, and they step down as you get to that mezzanine floor. And then the sleeping pods that I talked about, and I think my colleague Rachel spent an awful lot of time trying to find out upholstery details and mattress details and so on. And then the dressing rooms, and this is one where we very much inherited the space available. And going to the ballet, you could see the absolute carnage that these are often kept in. But actually, the skip is one of the most important things for dancers. So as Glenn explained, the ballet is a touring company, and so every dancer has a skip, and that skip needs to be put somewhere. So this, I hasten to add, this is Amber's sketch, not my sketch, in biro pen, but just talks about the absolute need for somewhere for the skip, somewhere for them to get ready, a mirror, storage, etc., places to charge the phone and so on. And actually for the interior students in the audience, Catherine Jones did these visuals actually of the kind of the dressing area, the booths. And then just finally, in terms of the interior, the furniture selection and procurement. So this was obviously the breakout furniture, but the office was a key area. And for a long time, we explored these sort of pods that would sort of give us some really interesting meeting rooms in the space. And then just some other ideas for how that office could be laid out. And I remember one of the real challenges in the first instance, Tamara's office and changing area was in the corner of the building, which was the really sort of prestigious area. And then finance and HR kept saying they needed more privacy. And so I was sort of tasked with with the job of saying to Tamara that we needed to move her office into the core of the building, and being Mediterranean, she was very concerned about the sort of daylight, but she said for the good of the team, she would give up that prestigious spot in the corner. And I remember when we signed off the plan, actually, I went to high five her in this meeting, and everyone in the meeting was just aghast. You know, nobody touches Tamara, nobody sort of engages with her, and she returned the high five, and the whole sort of meeting breathed a sigh of relief, and we knew that we'd signed it off at that point. And then just in terms of the furniture, we arranged a furniture day. So this is mostly around Clerkenwell, and we had about 15 representatives from the ballet who came round and looked at furniture, and this is everything from desks and office chairs through to breakout furniture, reception furniture, you know, meeting furniture, and so on. And so we spent a whole day going round. And then in terms of my last slide, I think it is, in terms of the actual furniture procurement, it was a two-stage process, and at one point the furniture budget was around £1 million, so it was a really significant spend. And we had a two-stage process and had to very much comply with Arts Council funding in terms of procurement. We invited, I think it was 7 or 8 companies, and that got down to, I think, 3. And there was a huge furniture schedule, and you can see a couple of pages from it there, and people had to price from that. And then that was pretty much the end of our involvement as the project went onto site. So I'll hand back to Glenn now. Thank you.
Well, I think, can you hear me, Kevin? Yeah. What we're going to do now is jointly do what we would love to be able to do, which is to take you through the building. We've given a few tours to judging panels and to other architects and other designers. And what we've tried to do is to do that really on some pictures with some drawings as well, just to give you a feeling. So this is, we'll just take you through as if we were walking through the building. So this is the foyer. The first thing you see is the staircase that Kevin and I sweated with Dan and others on for so long. So it was this balancing act of getting it to, and at the end, I think, you know, the idea of it being a ribbon, Kevin, still holds. It does, because even though it's made out of flat pieces for a number of different reasons, its solidity in the space and its differentness to the concrete, it's so much better that it wasn't a concrete thing, that it's a lighter thing and it climbs up. And it's also, you can see how the building, how the staircase, because everything's working really hard on it. The handrails, the flat metal 20mm sheet handrails are part of the structural solution. But there is this idea that the staircase is a tool, it's a communication device. It's wide enough that you can hover and have conversations. And very importantly, as you go up through the space, you can see all the different parts of the building. Kevin, do chip in at any point on this. I mean, go on.
I was just going to say that big piece of furniture that you see on the left-hand side and has been moved to the right on the right-hand side image. This was a piece from 01, and going back to almost that very first thing we showed, where we didn't want the furniture almost to have a kind of front and a back. We wanted furniture that could exist in the space and be movable. So this is a wonderful piece that is made up of a series of sort of segments. And what was also good, and you can just make it out on the left hand side, it had a kind of split in it depending on how you arrange it. So as you arrived in the front door, you could actually see through the furniture to the reception desk. So that was a really sort of instrumental piece for us, and you can see that it can be sort of split up and moved around.
I mean, a big part of the project was revealing the story of the building, the concrete and glass story of it from the foyer space. So even though it was essential for the dance studios, we didn't want to change the language of the materials and the vocabulary of the building in any of the spaces. And then this is sort of an informal space up on the first floor, which is used for receptions, for fundraising activities, and actually just as a living room. It's also, it brings in sort of revenue because it can be hired out for events as well. I suppose this space here, which was Studio 1, was the hardest working and the most difficult to work really, because it's like every other dance studio, but as you can see from the section on the left hand side, it's also got seating, retractable seating. So this is a little mini version of the the London Coliseum. So it's got a very large stage with wing space, but very importantly, it's got a full fly tower. So when you go in there, it's this Rubik cube that everyone can't believe when they walk into it, because this is on the ground floor, but the height of the fly tower goes all the way up to the tallest part of the building.
Can you just go back one,
yeah.
Glenn? Just
Yeah.
to the that one. So again, just trying to emphasise how game changing this was from Markover House. I mean, if anyone's really interested, actually, it's on YouTube. I think it was a South Bank show that was about the English National Ballet, and it shows Markover House and how challenging it was. And I remember that as part of our process of understanding the ballet, we went to the Nutcracker, we went to the opening night, which was fantastic. But we also went very interestingly to the dress rehearsal of Swan Lake at the Royal Albert Hall. And what's great about the dress rehearsal is, obviously it's the last chance to get things right. And as they came out after the interval, they spent about 20 minutes respacing all the dancers. And this was really because they'd been practicing in Markover House, which was nowhere near the scale of the Albert Hall or the Coliseum. And so all had to sort of, redefine their spacing before they could do the second act. And so now they have this space. It really means that, it's much better preparation for when they go on tour.
So this was the full technical sort of setup they got with full counterweight rigging in the. So when you're there, it's got all of the hanging and flying facilities, and it's also this space that organisations like Cameron Mackintosh use for their productions. They can hire it out to other producers to bring in money. And then these plans just start to show how we then manage the larger spaces versus the smaller ones. The smaller ones sort of wrapped around them. Every little corner of space was used. This is the one job where because we hadn't got, the brief, including hydrotherapy, a swimming pool in there for therapy, workspace, sewing space. Every corner of this building was made to work very hard, wrapped around the engine, which is these dance studios. And then this shows the quality of light and the volume inside those dance studios. And then wrapped around those spaces such as this, which we worked, and Kevin's team also worked, understanding what the adjacencies were. So you got dyeing rooms, fabric rooms, stitching rooms, storage spaces. This was a factory wrapped around all of this. So it was a factory for dance, but it was also a manufacturing space for everything else that needed to go on tour.
Yeah, I think we had an hour and a half meeting with the lady that made the shoes, for example, telling us about the shoes, and that depending on your sort of rank of dancer, you get more shoes per month. And the other really fascinating one, similar to the space that Glenn was talking about, was that they keep records of all of the costumes that they've done previously and material samples, so that they can, the next time a particular ballet goes on the road, they can, they've got all of that information for sort of continuity purposes. So how all of that information is stored and the size of those books and so on, kind of incredible amount of detail actually that you probably would never think when you see this, because everything's been thought of and everything has been designed for.
So the amount of strain and endurance that the dancers go through is incredible. When we were working on the project, you got a sense of how punishing their regime is. So much so that the bottom right-hand picture is a hydrotherapy pool, very warm water. So part of the recovery process is hydrotherapy, where dancers can go and warm up their muscles, be supported by water before then having other treatments. So there's a whole sort of back of house sort of therapy, treatment and strengthening department to the building. And then these circulation spaces, they said you've got to go and see the building, the dance center in Houston. So Dan and myself went over to Houston in Texas and borrowed a few ideas. The most important one was the window, middle picture. The circulation is such that you end up with two floors of secondary support space for a dance studio wherever possible, and we put one into the main studio one from the circulation, are these portholes which connect different parts of the English National Ballet family together. So without intruding on the privacy of dancers, you can get glimpses of the activity as you walk around the building. And then we designed with Kevin's team, the wrappers around this, the wooden sort of wrapper is deep enough to be a seat. So they're perching places, because there's lots of time where you've got students, and it was these connections between the school and the dance company which were very, very important and strategically placed. So, I mean, I think we've pretty much come through to the end. There's lots of other slides that we took out because otherwise we'd never contain this to an hour. But just in terms of its summary, it's not just about great building for English National Ballet. It's been recognised as being great for the community. So the Mayor of London has invested through the Good Growth Fund. It really has made those connections to the local neighbourhood. And speaking to Tamara recently, she said one of the things she's most proud of, and she's affirmed her decision to move to East London, was the warm and vibrant relationship that they've got with the local communities, where it's links with schools, but as Kevin said, with the Parkinson Foundation as well. So it really is now a breathing, living part of this part of London. And one could argue that English National Ballet has sort of brought life and has breathed life into London City Island. It wouldn't have been the same place without. And it's interesting, I think it's been even more sought after as a desirable place to live since English National Ballet have decided to base itself there. So I'm not going to read out all these things. These are some facts. I mean, it's all the people it's reached and what it's done for the organisation. But I suppose that was the crowning sort of comment, really. And it wasn't, you know, we didn't force Tamara to say that. She went on record, and this was in her speech when she stood up in front of, on the opening night, she stood in front of the Mayor of London and all the other funders that allowed the thing to happen, including the Arts Council. She said, and she didn't, you know, it's not because it was posh or it wasn't a trophy building. It was actually did everything that she wanted it to do, which was to be a place where dancers could make amazing work. And so that's why she said, not because she doesn't like, it's not because she doesn't like the building. It's the building is most important and most successful in that it is a vehicle to do great work. And so that's why she said it's the best ballet center, or the best building for dance, she said, actually, in the world. And we would love somebody to come and ask us some questions and to ask, and so that's the end of the presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much for that presentation. There's a virtual round of applause going on right now, so thank you all for your time and your presentation. I'm going to open the Q&A in a moment. We've got about 8 or 9 questions that we've got so far, so I'll come to those in a moment. But as you were talking, I was really reminded of a quote from Dalibor Vesely, which is contained in Patrick Lynch's Journal of Civic Architecture, where he says, if you haven't contributed to and improved the network of communications and atmospheres of a place, but simply disrupted it, then your work isn't creativity, it's just production. And I think what's really fascinating about the whole project, but also working through the scales, is you had an ex-industrial site here to deal with, and out of that you've managed to kind of wrought a community of, well, firstly housing, but also this really impressive cultural institution, which is moved from its city centre site into this ex-industrial, what was wasteland, but is very much a destination. And it appears to be making a really, I'd argue, kind of civic contribution to that landscape, because there wasn't people inhabiting it in the way that they are now. And I wonder if it's something to do with the dance school and the school itself being co-located. So you get the kind of cycle of the school day, but also you get the cycle of the ballet school. And I think it's what's really fascinating about it is that it is off-site, and you've made quite a clear position, Glenn, about the technologies being borrowed from other realms of engineering. Was And I won't hog the questioning because I know there's other people who want to ask the question.
A question.
Was it well, if you can't ask anything, just say it as a long sentence, but was it a direct transfer of that engineering technology, or was there a lot of kind of re-engineering those components to bring it into the form that we see it?
No, because of the budget, we pretty much chose from a catalogue. These
Right.
the double T's were a product, because if we'd have made them bespoke, all of a sudden they'd be a lot more expensive. And they're really amazing pieces of structure as well. But because they're used in highways, that's what you get. That, you know, I think that was the largest span that we could get for the loading. I think they can go further if they're carrying less load, but with the loads, and what we needed to do was to use all of their depth to avoid deflection and vibration, because that would have then created noise below. Because what we had were very, very strict rules about how much noise and vibration could be transferred. It would put off completely the dance studio below, their dancers, if you could transfer the noise coming through.
Sure. So the first question that we had out was actually anonymous. I think it might be from Oscar, but I'm not quite sure. Have either of you or someone in your office read or come across Dance Spaces by Mark Foley, written in '94? It was the first book about designing an architectural space for dance beyond just materials and dimensions.
A long time ago I did. It was Bubble Foley Fisher, who were really fantastic. Did some amazing buildings, arts buildings. So yes, aware of it. Great book.
Fantastic, great. Thank you for that question. Rasha has commented, fascinating work. I love the different iterations of the sculptural staircase. How did the Frank Gehry precedent of the dancing building inform the design? Maybe one for you, Kevin.
Yeah, well, it probably didn't in a sort of obvious way. I think what you have to remember is that we win this project. We don't really know anything about it. We're getting up to speed. You're having very early thoughts, because also in the presentation to win the project, we had to sort of, what would our approach be? What would our concepts be? So you're trying to sort of second guess. And I think this is always interesting for students, because they often try to be so certain about something before they do anything. And in these situations, you have to sort of declare something. This is what we think it's going to be. And then, of course, you have to be sort of brave enough, confident enough, willing enough to let some things go. And I think the staircase that we said was very expensive. I think that probably was, the height of how far that concept went. But then the realities of budget, structure, time, and so on. So I think what it really did was we set out our stall. We want to create some dynamism. I think the staircase does that, and some of the furniture obviously does that as well. But also things like Glenn was talking about, the sort of views that you get through, the way people interact with each other. It's not all about sort of necessarily kind of organic forms everywhere, for example.
Well, I think what we found also, one of the things we learned from English National Ballet was their discipline's a bit like ours. There's a tautness and an economy of getting things to be really amazing. So listening in and then hearing how they make performances, it's all about stretching things, getting people to do the most with what they've got available. So the tautness and paring back some of the bits on cost, I found the building got more exciting in places when we had less money and we were told no, you couldn't do it. So I think the staircase is more successful now than some of the more sort of maybe more complex sort of shapy ones, where because a lot of those, the steel handrail wouldn't have been working as hard. Every part of that, a bit like sinews in a body, are stretched and working. So there's a leanness and sort of an efficiency in all parts of the building that we end up doing. Not much, so it's not inefficient, it's very efficient.
Yeah, it's really evident from the planning and the sections. There's a couple of questions that I might put together. So Danita and Ahmad have got similar questions. In terms of the form and aesthetics, was it very close to the original conception, and would you do it differently if you did it again?
Do you know the aesthetics came at the end? We've got a way of designing in the office which we sort of say you don't actually start with a visual image of what the building has to be. it's sort of, if it's going to be a great building, it sort of comes out after you've considered everything else. So we held back from giving it a very strong external appearance until we'd really figured out what it was going to be made out of, and then it was allowed to sort of find its own way as an exterior. I mean, we genuinely did that. I remember, you know, so I remember we did visuals of the inside and outside, but it's not that we had sort of a killer image that we said that's what the building's got to be. The building actually evolved into being what it is.
I think actually as well from those early visuals, because there's this sort of publicity one of the coloured buildings around, and then the ballet sort of in the middle. And I think actually the final product is more restrained. It's more confident than that. Actually, it's got a real subtlety to it as it ended up.
So it's I'm just wondering if Markov House bore any relationship to the way you approached it at all, or I'm just looking at the website parallel of the staircase.
The thing about Markov House was it drove English National Ballet to be creative with found space. And that's why Tamara and the rest of the team drove us so hard. And they were saying, well, what about that space under the stairs there? Because that's what they've been doing for about 50 or 60 years. In this building that they'd found and then had to be creative with, they would just they would always be finding ways to store things, use it for parties. So when they started to look at our plans, they were quite disruptive in terms of the way that they would then say, well, what about that space there? What can we do with this? So they didn't feel in any way, they were not passive recipients of a design by architects and designers. They were very much engaged on rolling their sleeves up and say, we understand space because we've been shaping it already. They were very happy with, and they were very confident in shaping space and understanding how movement happened. Oops. Sorry.
So I have another question from Jasmine, who asks or says, thank you both for expressing the level of detail behind your design decisions. How did the wider master plan of London City Island affect site constraints, and were there any specific considerations or complications which impacted the design of the ballet?
That's too long a question to answer succinctly, but I will do my best. All I'll say is this project had already started to be built before the banking crisis hit. There were some piles in, there was already a master plan in place. We got invited to work with Ballymore to make sense of that and to bring something which was much simpler and still using some of the foundations and structures. So we inherited a little bit of what you see, but actually we reinterpreted it to create this necklace of solid buildings around the outside. But we in terms of the character, and then there was always the idea that there would be a soft center to it, a creative center. But also we transformed it with Ballymore because we got rid of all of the ground floor sort of car parking and everything else and freed it up for creative space. And so English National Ballet has been a catalyst now. Now we've got London Film School, there's 2 arts organisations, there's a music academy going to be hopefully moving in. So the idea is that it's a much richer sort of destination now than just having one arts organisation, but English National Ballet gave confidence to other arts organisations to co-locate.
Brilliant. Okay. So just looking through we've got a couple more questions coming up. There's a couple of questions about the relationship between the stripped back nature of the exterior and the dynamism and sculptural form of the interior, but I think we've probably looked at some of that already. Had some discussion.
I think actually might something to add on. Just something to add on that. When we pitched the project, from memory, we didn't know what it looked like.
Okay.
So obviously, if we'd have been presented with the scheme as it was at that point, we may have had different ambitions. So really, you're going off perhaps a stereotype of ballet, of dance, but again, you're trying to win a project. So you're trying to show that you have the ability to have an attitude to respond to something. And I remember when we won it in the first meeting at Glenn's, we all sat down in the meeting room, and we really discussed sort of a shared approach, really, and that's really the key with collaborating. That it doesn't matter where the idea comes from. And there are other things. I was looking actually in the files the other day when we were putting the slides together, and the project directory is 2 sides of A4. The number of consultants, the acousticians, the M&E, project managers, QSs. I mean, there's a phenomenal, phenomenal sort of list of people involved, and you're having to sort of navigate and negotiate across all of these people. And you could say in one way everything is a compromise, but everything has so many so many boxes it has to tick that you have to kind of collaborate to find a solution that ultimately is is good for the client. So I think a lot of these questions about perhaps maybe the sense of disappointment that we were talking about all of these things and maybe people think they didn't quite happen, is really the realities of collaborating, and how you achieve what you achieve in the end. I'm certainly incredibly happy with. I'm really proud to have worked on this. I think it's a terrific building.
I have a couple of comments that I'll relate to. So great buildings have that simplicity which takes real skill to create. The structure, the material palette gives the building a timeless quality. I think we've talked a little bit about the role of Tamara and the client group in that success. So that was a comment really from Alistair. Sudesh has commented, amazing presentation. The curvilinear precedent spaces were clearly impacted in the design. And the contrast between the concrete and rough textures represent a really clear contradiction. So she's just commenting, really works well and love to see the combination. And the final comment that I have here is from Satwinder. Great talk, thank you. What was the move that the client made early on which allowed another studio to be included? How did you shoehorn that additional studio into that? Was that the space under the stairs?
We made our office smaller.
Shrunk down some plant areas, and we rejigged some of the back of house areas, which then released the space. We were hounded until we did it, but it was great actually. But so having this client didn't just read plans; they thought in 3-dimensional, as you'd expect them to actually. So. Anyway, can I just say also, just one thing that I didn't mention is it was an absolute privilege to work with Kevin and his team on it, because we didn't engineer it to have 2 old mates working on this job, but it took a lot of the sort of anxiety and stress out of it because we knew each other. There was no mucking about. We just said, this is, let's come up, and we jointly came up with a story. So there was no politics, there was no complications. We just sat down and we had a lot of fun with it. It was a great project. I loved working on it.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great message to end on. I think. I don't think we've got any more questions coming here. There is an anonymous question or a comment that we've just had through. I live in City Island and love the ballet building. You always get a warm and welcoming feeling as you see the ballet building while walking on the bridge. To see the ballet building from the stairs of the bridge. So that's
great.
A nice reference from a local inhabitant. You can put that on your website.
Be there to see it.
So
Okay.
Don't think we've got any more questions. I don't know if any of my colleagues have got any questions they want to pitch in with at all.
There's one there, Mike. 2 key lessons for 2 architects working collaboratively. So
yeah, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, well, we actually work. I mean, we are architects. We're only a space studio, is only a small practice, but we've actually collaborated quite a few times with other architects. We've worked twice now with Glenn. We worked with on the University College Birmingham campus, very similar exercise, and again with Simon Pearson and his team, and we've worked many times with Brian Priest-Newman as well. And I think what it is, it's about everybody being, again, open to where a good idea comes from. It doesn't matter if it comes from the youngest and junior member of the team, or it comes from the director at the top. So I think it's actually about having a confidence, a sort of mutual respect, and again, remembering what you're doing this for. You're doing it for the client. You're trying to spend their money wisely. You're trying to give them the best investment, give them a great place to work or live in. And I think if everybody kind of remembers that, I mean, we love collaborating with other architects. It's probably still unfortunately a bit unusual. We obviously go into most of these collaborations with our interiors hat on, but we are actually working on something else as architects collaborating with other architects, and you learn so much from each other actually.
Okay.
Yeah, you never stop collaborating, and increasingly over the last year, whether because we're collaborating and we're meeting in conversations like this, it's becoming less and less important which organisation that you're part of. All we want to do, all of us, is work with brilliant people and energetic people, people with ideas who are interested. We don't, as Kevin said, it's a thrill to work and to be challenged, and increasingly with younger designers in our office who come through the university there and other universities, it doesn't only happen at a sort of a senior level. Some of the best ideas come from people who are just new to the project or new out of university. It's being open enough, as Kevin said, to get the most from every conversation going. Yeah, you've got to be really quite confident to be open as well.
Yeah, pull no punches and actually agree on what
as
you
well.
need to
Actually,
agree on.
I talked about my highlight in terms of the design process when we looked at the staircase, and I think it's about being willing to have those iterations. The first staircase design, and then the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one. And I say this to students all the time: you've got to just put something down, and then you've just got to keep working and working. And Glenn and I and others in the team, we'd go, well, what about this? What about this? And you thought you'd cracked it, and then someone else chucked something in the mix, and you have to have that patience to then go back and okay, what's the next bit? How sometimes you feel like you've lost track.
We were working today, somebody was trying to develop one of these things. Every organisation does it. And they said, what are our values? And we were going through them. And actually the one that floated quite close to the top is just bloody determination. When it gets difficult, it's just not giving up and just carrying on and having the energy to keep on looking at it. That's absolutely one of the most important ones.
Yeah, stick with it. Well, maybe that's a good point to end our evening talk on. So thank you very much to our guests this evening. Thanks also to our audience this evening. I think we certainly sold over 120 tickets, and we've had a lot of people with us, and so we've definitely got other events coming up, so do please join us for our next School of Architecture events. Thank you both. It's been an absolute pleasure to see you. Hope to see you in person very soon, and take care everyone. See you soon.
There's a great bar in town if you want to meet us there.
You can't miss a promo. Bye. Thank you. Bye bye.
See you.
Thanks all.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.